Okay, I think this is the fifth of these videos, and I went back and looked at the first four and saw some things that maybe neglected to mention. So I wanted to touch on some of that before we continue on. Let's talk for a little bit about fingering. I'm a little reluctant to get too far into fingering because guitar players a lot of times have a tendency, once they learn a fingering, they just focus on the fingering and they shut their ear off. They just sort of go on autopilot and they're just playing that fingering. And that is not what we're going for here at all. The idea is to visualize the fretboard, hear it in your ear, as opposed to hearing it in some other place. Anyway, so, but it can help you to maybe play through some of this stuff a little bit. One of the first things we did was the chromatic scale. And as far as first position, there's really no need to get into fingering it. You just, any of this stuff that you're playing in first position, you just keep your hand in first position, and your first, second, third, fourth fingers play the first, second, third, fourth frets accordingly. But as you're going along the strings, going along one string and playing something, the first thing we did was the chromatic scale. And if you're doing that off an open string, you can maybe play the first four notes, open string, first fret, second fret, third fret, and then shift to fourth position, then shift to eighth, and then once you've played that last note in eighth with your fourth finger, slide up into ninth, and work your way back down, slide back into fifth, slide into first, and back, so the whole thing is like... First three fingers, shift into fourth, shift into eighth, go up into ninth, back into fifth, back into first, open. If you're doing it off a fretted note, or all the way up to... then I think I touched on this in one of the other videos. You just 1, 2, 3, 4, shift into the next position, shift into the next position, and then just go up one fret to get your octave, up one position I should say, and then shift down. So in this example you're in F, so you're going to go first position, fifth position, ninth position, then you're going to shift into 10th, 6th, 2nd, and then shift back down. And let's see if I can get it up the neck here where it's a little tighter. Let's try that again. Alright, you get the idea. That was not the cleanest execution. And the intonation is not great on this guitar, especially as you work your way up the neck. It needs a setup. But anyway, that's how to do the chromatic thing across one string. If you're getting into the major scale that we talked about, if you're doing that off an open string, I would go open, second fret with the second finger, then I would shift into fourth, and get your third note, fourth note, fifth note. Then I would shift into ninth and get 6, 7, 8. So coming down, shift into fourth. And that's just a little bit more convenient way to finger it. Don't get too caught up in the fingering. I'd rather have somebody going with one finger and actually, listening and looking and searching for the stuff than to just go on autopilot with these fingerings. But to, kind of play both sides of it here. That idea of shifting that's a very useful thing to be able to do, to get up the neck. So, all right. Now the other thing that I didn't touch on before was when we talked about the chromatic scale. Then we also talked about the major scale. Did the major triad. And if you're doing the major triad, I'd go off an open string, I'd go open, 4th fret with the 4th finger, and then you want to shift up to 7th, and then reach for that 12th fret with your 4th finger. To back up for a second, if going back to that major scale, if you do it off of a fretted note, I would go 1st finger, 3rd finger, then I would, in this case we're in F, so we're starting in 1st position, shift up to 5th, and then shift up to 10th, and then just come back down. Shift into 5th, back into 1st. And as you're playing through that, you don't need to be thinking about the number of the position you're in. Just think of the shape of the scale like we talked about. Maybe play it with one finger first. And then just, if you want to do it with the shifting fingering that we're talking about, just visualize where the next note is in the scale and shift to that position. Okay, now when we talked about before, when I talked about the chromatic scale, I talked about the major scale, talked about the major triad, and we mainly talked about them in ascending form, going from the lowest note to the highest note. It's also important to listen to them in descending form, going from the highest note to the lowest note. Take a major scale. It's important to get that sound into your head too, because if you're going to use this stuff and improvise with it, you're going to want to play lines that can go in either direction. You're going to want to play lines that can ascend or can descend or can hop around. So, the more ways you know how to kind of navigate the scale and hear it and see it, the better off you're going to be. When we did the chromatic scale, we talked about intervals, and I talked about the interval was a distance between two notes. And then I played all the intervals in the chromatic scale. All those intervals there were ascending from this low E to each of the other notes. Even though I played it all the way up and I played it all the way down, even when I was coming down, each interval was an ascending interval, right? that's ascending, that's ascending. They're all ascending from that open string to whatever note to create the different intervals. With the chromatic scale, it's also a good idea to start at the top of the octave, in this case the 12th fret, and go from that note to each of the other ones. So you're playing them descending from that higher octave, like this. Now again, when we talked about the chromatic scale, I didn't name all those intervals. Right now we're just dealing with the intervals from the major scale and the major triad. And again, when I got into talking about the intervals from the major scale and the major triad, I only addressed them ascending. Major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh octave. And I played my way back down those intervals. Perfect octave, major seventh, major sixth, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, major second, major third. Perfect fourth, major third, major second, and then you're back down. It's also important to, again, take those intervals from the major scale, and when you start at the top, and again, you go from this top note down to each of the other notes, you get this sound. Those are different intervals, but they still belong to the major scale. I'm trying to expand on this without creating confusion. I hope I'm succeeding. So as we, when I first talked about the major scale, I talked about it as a pattern of whole steps and half steps. And as you ascended, pattern goes, you start on the note, whatever note you're starting on, and then it goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, and you're back at the octave. And then I talked about when you're descending the scale, it's a different pattern of whole steps and half steps because it's not a symmetrical scale. Some of the intervals are whole steps, some are half steps, and they happen in different places. So when you're coming down from the octave, it goes half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. Now at the same time, since when you play the major scale ascending, that's a certain pattern of whole steps and half steps. And when you play the major scale descending, that's another different set of whole steps and half steps. When you play the associated intervals, ascending from the low octave, that gives you a certain set of intervals. When you play the associated intervals, descending from the higher octave, that gives you a different set of intervals. So I already talked about what the intervals were going up from the low octave. Coming down from the high octave, they go minor second. That's a minor third. This is still a perfect fourth. This is still a perfect fifth. This is a minor sixth. That's a minor seventh. And a perfect octave. So from the top it goes minor second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh. Okay. So just to try to keep this clear here, I'm going to play them ascending from the low octave up to the 12th fret. I'm going to name them major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect, let's try that again. Major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave. Now, a minute ago when I was going down, I got to here and I said that this was still a perfect fifth, this was still a perfect fourth. That was incorrect. They're actually swapped. on the way up. Anyway, let's just disregard what I said a minute ago. All right. Coming down. Minor second, a half step. Minor third, 3 half steps. Perfect fourth, 5 half steps. Perfect fifth, 7 half steps. Minor sixth, 8 half steps. Minor seventh, 10 half steps. And perfect octave. Try that one again. Struggling with that a little bit myself. Okay, with the major triad, when we did it ascending in one of the last videos, root, and then that first interval is a major third, perfect fifth, and perfect octave. If you start at this higher octave and you come down and get those lower notes of the triad, the intervals go perfect fourth, minor sixth, perfect octave. And in position, same deal. Major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave. Coming down, minor second, minor third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh, perfect octave. With the triad, major third, perfect fifth, perfect octave. Coming down, perfect fourth, minor sixth, perfect octave. Don't get too hung up on these names. I'm just kind of doing that for the sense of to maybe dip your toe in the water as far as theory, and to have some point of reference, some accurate point of reference as to what you're actually doing here. The important thing is the sounds. So to boil this all down, you should be, if it's a scale, triad, you should be playing the associated intervals of that scale or that triad, starting from the lowest note, ascending to the other notes, and then also starting from the highest note, descending to the lowest note. All right, let's move on. I'm getting a headache. Another thing that I wanted to talk about here. First thing, in the first video we talked about plotting notes along the guitar. That I did. Now you can take these scales and major scales and triads, and you can do the same thing with them. You can plot them. Okay, now say the first 5 major scales or triads you would play. Since they start on the 6th string, there's only going to be a couple places you're going to be able to get them. Here it is in first position. get to the A string, now I can do them off that open A string. And I can also do it here. You get the idea. What I'm doing here is I'm taking the major scale and I'm playing it in first position, and I'm playing it along the strings, and as I go, I'm playing it, from the lowest major scale to the highest one, and I'm plotting it out as I go along the fretboard. Let's just skip ahead here and see if we go up to here. Okay, here's an A flat major scale in first position. I can't get it here because I'll run out of notes before I get up there. Okay, let's do the same thing with arpeggios. I'm just going to start on the 5th string. Yep. Wow, slow down a little bit here. And you can also get that here. And I'll do this, what I did a minute ago, but with the triad in A flat in first position. Okay, you get the idea. And again, this stuff will make your brain hurt, particularly when you're first starting to do it. So, don't overdo it. I remember reading somewhere that when Wes Montgomery, that when he first started working on his whole octave thing, that he would practice it and it would actually give him headaches. He would do it for a while, and then he would get a headache and he'd have to stop. But obviously, he did intervallic training working, and he totally got that together. So it's, you're stretching your brain. It's a good thing. Just mix it up with some other stuff. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to talk about here is so far we've only talked about 1 octave scales. And when we did all the major scales in the different keys in first position, we just did 1 octave scales. And again, like I talked about earlier in this lesson, you should play those descending too. When I first talked about that in one of the earlier lessons, we talked about how there are 16 different 1 octave scales available in first position. You start in E, and you go through the different keys, F sharp's on. When you get up to the second string at the fourth string at the second fret, you're back in the key of E. So there are a handful of scales here, 5 to be precise, that are available in 2 octaves. E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and G, sorry, back up a second, G, and in the higher octave still in G, and then G sharp or A flat. So in those 5 keys, you can combine those 1 octave fingerings and create a 2 octave scale that falls right under your fingers in first position. In E, in F, F sharp, G, and G sharp. And again, if you're if you want to get this eye, ear, hand, fretboard connection going, take those and run the intervals. Excuse me. And there are also 5 places where you can get a 2 octave triad, and they're the same places, obviously. E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, and play those ascending and descending. Broke my rule there. Play the associated intervals. You get into some awkward fingering situations there, but that's okay. It's again, it's not so much about fingering, it's about seeing this stuff on the neck and hearing it. That's the whole deal we're going for here. And like I talked about earlier in this video, do them descending. Here's a major scale. And here's a major triad. Okay. And eventually you could try and plot this stuff out. I mean, this is endless, which can be daunting, but don't think of it that way. Any time you spend doing this is going to help your playing. You just don't want to do this to the exclusion of everything else. You want this to be one piece of a broader practice regimen. Okay, I'm going to leave you with one last thing here. I gave you that Joy to the World melody a while back because it's very familiar and it's scalar, and it's a good way to take some of this stuff and apply it to an actual piece of music. This is another tune, another really hip tune. It's from The Sound of Music, the Do Re Mi song. You know, Do, a deer, a female deer, blah blah blah. Now, the actual song, it alters a couple of notes through the melody. There are a couple of notes that aren't in the scale, but we're just going to alter them back so they are in the scale. So I'm going to play it down on the open 6th string. Right? One more time. So you can do it along each string. I did it starting off the open string. Anywhere you can lay out an octave. So on. Any way you can lay out an octave along a string or in position, theoretically you should be able to work your way through that melody. And doing it will be a great exercise for developing this ear, hand, fretboard, eye coordination. Again, you know, the idea here is not to, you know, start a Julie Andrews tribute band, but to learn the fretboard. So I did it down there. I'm going to do it in position. Not in position. Yeah, you know what? I'll do it up here, okay? I'm going to do it the highest place I can in first position. And just for laughs, let's plot that in A flat along the neck. Here it is on the 4th string. Try that again. Maybe I need to spend some time with these videos, huh? All right, so that was it on the 4th string. Let's do it on the 5th string. You get the idea. All right, I know this was kind of a long one. I hope you know, brought a cup of coffee or packed a lunch or something. But I am finally done. And again, this is about, you know, ear, eye, hand, fretboard, getting that all wired up with the ultimate goal of being able to think of some musical idea, locate it on the guitar, and play it in real time. Okay, see you next time.